So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to ConnectIn. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you this morning. One of the things that fascinates me is the rapid change and the speed of change that's happening in industries around the world and how that affects all of us. So as I was thinking about our session together today, I was thinking about one particular question that's often posed to me. And that is, in this world where there's so much change and these mega trends that are shaping us, how do we come out on top? This is a question all of us as business leaders need to ask. How do we end up winning? And specific to our discussion today, I realize the core of the answer rests within the war for talent, something all of us are acutely aware of. So what I thought I'd do today is discuss three mega trends that are shaping industry in general, and how they affect us. And then perhaps give my perspective on how some of the very best HR leaders are partnering with businesses to make them more successful. But also, along the way, discuss some of the challenges that many of you are faced with and how some are coping with them. So let's get started. The first trend I want to discuss is the digitization of pretty much everything. The internet has disrupted everything from communication to commerce to entertainment. If you just look at smartphones, for instance, in markets like here in Singapore and in Hong Kong, 87% of phones today are smartphones. It's so disruptive to life, in fact, that the Singapore LTA has decided that if they find you playing with your smartphone or tablet while you're driving, it's a punishable offense. So on your way home, no playing with those phones. But seriously though, the digital industry has disrupted recruitment, and we all know that. But what I find more fascinating is how how digital has disrupted organizations in general. There are functions, there are roles that are merging today. There are new ones that are emerging. The org structures today have to be flexible enough to accommodate roles of the future, have the ability to understand the skills that they will need for these roles of the future. This is difficult stuff. Let's take an example of one company close to home that's been faced with this. Singpost is a national postal provider, right? Well, the postal business for a long, long time has been disrupted by digital. And when Singapore Post looked at this, they didn't see just a challenge, they also saw an opportunity. They saw an opportunity to be a major player in e-commerce and logistics in the future. That requires a completely different skill set, a different kind of talent. If you're building an organization focused on e-commerce and you're in the postal business, you need to be extremely effective at not just making a statement of fact and focusing your business in that direction. You need to be able to attract the right kind of people to rebuild yourself. Now, we at LinkedIn have been privileged to work closely with Singapore Post as they've reinvented themselves. It's something I'm happy to discuss with you later. But I think I wanted to just pause there and think about how all of us are getting affected by the digital disruption in our lives and how it adds an additional level of challenge to our org structures and our business strategies. So that's the first megatrend. The second one, well, we live in a social age. I'm not just talking about social media and social technology, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, not just these guys. I think what's important to understand is the social age of the internet has resulted in a democratization of the conversation between organizations and individuals. In simple English, in the past, organizations had a one-directional conversation with individuals. Today, that conversation is bidirectional. You might be talking with interesting candidates, for example, but they are talking with your current employees. People talking with other people. What does that mean to all of us? Two words: employer branding. You see, your current employees are the physical manifestation of your culture, your values. They're the best way for you to talk about your employer brand. And more companies are finding ways to unlock this potential and to leverage this core asset, your talent. But that's not all. A recent study by the Altimeter Group found that socially engaged companies will simply outperform in sales, in the ability to attract talent, basically every facet of business. But what is a socially engaged company? This is a really important detail to understand. A socially engaged company is one where the use of social technologies is organization-wide. It's not restricted to one department or one small team or one young 21-year-old in a corner who's managing your social profile. A socially engaged company understands that all your employees are already using social media, and leveraging that as a strength rather than a point of weakness is what separates the winners from the also-rans. So that's your second trend. Now this is kind of scary. You're getting all this digital disruption, the social age, but with it also comes a unique opportunity. The opportunity to make decisions based on insights driven by data. Now this is not news to some of you in the room. Our research finds that 40% of companies here in Southeast Asia make hiring decisions based on data and insights. If you are one of this 40%, congratulations. But on the flip side of that coin, if you're part of the 60% of companies here in Southeast Asia that does not use data or insights to make hiring decisions, I would submit that you're at a distinct disadvantage. Because let me give you an example of the kind of data that people are using to make important strategic decisions. This is the example of a talent flow analysis that we did. This is real data from a year ago for an anonymized technology company. This is a list of their competitors that they submitted to us. And essentially, it's giving you a sense of, and gave them a sense of where they're losing talent and where they're gaining talent. So versus their top competitors, are they a net exporter or importer of talent? As you might imagine, this conversation is not had in the back room. It's not had in the HR department. It's had in the boardroom with the executive team. We'll revisit that in a future slide. But as I've had this opportunity to work with some of the best HR leaders within our organization, but also to partner with many of you around the world, I found that there are three facets that top and successful HR leaders manifest. The first, they think like business leaders. They understand the business ramifications of all their decisions. What I mean by that is, they are not focused on just HR success. They're focused on business success. They understand what are the decisions. They have a role to play in broader business decisions which don't necessarily have a functional play in HR. The second thing they exhibit is that they breathe the brand. More and more HR leaders today are behaving like marketers. They understand that the brand has a direct rub-off on your ability to attract, retain, and engage talent. And the third thing is embracing data. Your ability to analyze this data, make smart strategic decisions based on that, and most importantly, give recommendations to that executive team and to your top client, the CEO. But this is difficult stuff. And in just a matter of a decade or so, you've seen an entire, in this case, your function completely disrupted. And what we are finding, and this is research done by IBM for the C-suite last year, we find that less than a third of CHROs are being truly effective in their roles. Hopefully you can see the data, but essentially, aside from providing basic HR transactions, there's a lot of work to be done. What I thought I'd do today is share 3 examples of HR leaders and the way they're being effective in partnering with their business. The first person I'd like to talk about is Jill. Jill's the head of recruiting for Airbnb, a disruptive company in their own right, growing like gangbusters around the world. And she talked about her experience as a candidate a handful of years ago. As she was getting recruited into Airbnb, she talked about a suboptimal experience of communication between the company and herself. and her expectation being that much higher in terms of what she'd have liked. In her words, candidates were falling between the cracks. Now, we've all been there. But what was fascinating is what she did next. She joined the company and eventually has become the head of recruiting. And when she did, she brought a marketer's mentality to how she approached candidates. She started looking at the candidate life cycle, similar to how a marketer would look at a customer life cycle. She was looking at every stage that the candidate went through. And most importantly, she understood the word-of-mouth impact of candidates who are going through the pipeline, your recruiting pipeline. Perhaps most importantly, candidates who aren't successful, who don't end up joining Airbnb. This approach of acting like a marketer has completely changed the way Airbnb deals with potential candidates and has had positive rub-off in terms of how they run their company in general. So that's Jill the marketer. The second example is close to home. Brendan's a close friend and business partner here at LinkedIn. He runs our global recruiting practice. He recruits for LinkedIn. He tells this fascinating story a few years ago, and I can empathize with him, of he just joined LinkedIn, and he wanted to make this presentation to our CEO, Jeff Weiner. And he built up this beautiful deck. It had his vision for how he was going to hire the best engineers and build the best organization in the Silicon Valley. And he sort of started with his presentation. He's presenting to Jeff. And about a slide or two in, Jeff puts his hand up and says, "Stop. This is fascinating, all this vision, but how are we going to get the best engineers yesterday?" So that's the essence of it, right? The customer was clear. Jeff wanted to get the best engineers, and it was a war for talent in the Valley. Brendan went back to the drawing board, and what he understood is if he leveraged data, if he acted like a numerati, he could be that much more effective. So what he did in one specific example was to partner with engineering managers to show them that they were looking for a purple squirrel, something that does not exist. We've all been there, where the business partner essentially defines a role and puts so many specifications in there that essentially that individual does not exist. But by using data, he was able to show that. He was able to show the team that they were looking for something that there simply was no supply of. Also, more importantly, he was able to show that by relaxing some of those facets, the talent pool suddenly balloons, and they're able to get those engineers. Well, fast forward a handful of years, and now we have a successful engineering recruiting practice in the Silicon Valley, largely driven by Brendan. A second great example was when we were thinking of opening a secondary development center outside California. As we were looking, and I was involved in this process, we were looking at different locations around the world. Brendan brought some interesting data to the table. As we sat there as a cross-functional team, sales, business development, finance, our CEO, Brendan showed up at that table with the data showing us talent pools, telling us where in the world we could find those kind of engineers. It helped us make a determination, and finally we opened our second development center in Bangalore, in India. Again, Brendan had brought that conversation to the boardroom. It wasn't a conversation happening in the back room, the numerati. The third example is from this part of the world. Anastasia works for Salmat, communication provider in Australia, the leading communication provider. What she found as a challenge is that they were having collaboration issues inside their company. And she brought a collaborative spirit to how she went about fixing it. She partnered with the marketing organization, with sales, with digital. She understood their needs. She worked with them. She also brought a global mindset to it. She wasn't just thinking about Australia, but broader. Perhaps most importantly, she started looking at assets they already had in-house. For instance, their unique culture. She used it to build their employer brand. But this collaborative spirit has greatly improved productivity of not just their hiring, but their overall culture as a company. Now, as you look at these three examples, I'd ask you to take a pause and see who you identify with most. But also, which one of these HR leaders could you stand to learn from? And that's where we come in. You see, LinkedIn is the world's largest professional network. Hardly news to you. But I think what's interesting is, with 313 million professionals and adding more than 2 per second, we know what's happening with these megatrends and we can help guide you. What's interesting closer to home is that with more than 56 million of those members here in Asia, that means that in markets like here in Singapore and in Australia, 8 out of every 10 professionals has a LinkedIn profile. In Southeast Asia alone, we have over 11 million members. And India, which has 27 million members, is our second largest member base globally. If you go back to that example of Singapore Post that I mentioned earlier, one thing that they understood was a part of their reinvention, and as they grew, was to tap into regional and global talent. This is something we'd be happy to partner with you on. As we think about these megatrends and how they're shaping industry, we at LinkedIn empathize. We understand the challenges you face. We also have a ton of experience working with a number of you. And our goal is to partner with you to make you more successful, make you more productive. So we look forward to working with you and having these conversations in boardrooms across Asia. I thank you for your time and your attention.
So I have a few questions for you, Hari.
Sure.
So that was a great pitch. You know, as you interact with HR leaders across, what is their general interaction with finance, marketing, and also just generally with other functions in the company? You know, if these are the skills that they need to adopt, they could probably learn something from some of their peer group.
No, I think it's a great question. I think what's happening, what's fascinating for me as a GM is to see the different departments learning from each other. And sort of the stereotypical skill sets that were once solely resident within marketing are now, for example, squarely in the HR space. We talked about employer branding. I give the example of Jill at Airbnb thinking about the candidate life cycle. These are not normal practices. I think what's also fascinating is this whole orientation around data. And I think that's one place where not only is HR being a great proponent and sort of people are picking up that skill set, they're partnering well with finance to understand how can they use this data, how can they be better partners and advisors. And I think that word advisor is something which people throw around, but it's something which I don't take lightly. For you to be a true advisor, for you to be at the core of solving a solution, you need to bring something to the table, not just be physically present, but have a view and ideally based on data. And I think that's something that I'm seeing more and more HR professionals take up.
Okay, that's great. So my other question is actually interesting, which is, let's say you did not go down this path of running LinkedIn Asia Pacific, and instead got into the HR into the HR profession, and you were instead our head of HR. How would you really work on your own skills to be able to future-proof yourself to be a successful HR leader?
It's a great question, because I think when I started 5 years ago with LinkedIn, I was essentially the HR leader. But I think it would be no different from my current role. I'd be looking for ways to surround myself with the best people. I wouldn't try and do it all myself. So, for instance, if I believe that analytics is a space where I'm not the strongest, I'd try and find the best analysts who could provide me with the data so that I could be that advisor. In the end, it's important for the HR leader to understand their role and to understand what their team is meant to do. And so my own philosophy is to find people who are far better than me in specific functional skill sets and surround myself with that kind of talent.
That's great. And so my final question, and y'all can actually engage with Hari on Twitter. He is very active, so I'm sure he will be around and happy to answer your questions, is really centered around, if I was leaving this room today, after today, and I wanted to go knock on the door of my CEO and have a conversation about some of the trends and some of the things that you heard over here, how would I initiate that conversation with my boss to say, look, I've just spent the day with LinkedIn and some of my peer group, and this is how I want to do my job differently, and this is what I need from you? What would I ask for?
I think that there's not a single answer for everyone. I think the key thing to understand is each company has its own challenges. You're at a different stage of evolution. Only you know what your challenges are. But once you've identified the challenge, and I'm talking about a business challenge, not just a challenge faced by the HR function. Once you've understood a business challenge, if you have the data and you're able to package it in a manner that can help answer it. I gave the example of Brendan bringing talent pools to the table. In many ways, he was not an automatic invitee to that conversation. We had a bunch of folks around the table, but he showed up because he had the data. He was by far the most important person in the room as soon as he did that. Yeah. And I think if you can assume that position in the room by understanding what the pain point is and then supporting your argument with data, you're always welcome in the room.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks so much, Hari. Thanks so much. All right.